You've all seen them. Businesses that are performing less than they should be. Businesses that could grow more than they have and be more profitable. They've frustrated you at the service counter and you just don't understand. Well, today we're talking about how to turn those businesses around, get them back on the straight and narrow. I'm Lance from Motive Power, and we're talking about business turnarounds. I'm fortunate to have a number of successful business turnarounds on my resume, but there's a lot of different factors, and today I'm going to delve into a few of the ways to make it work and some real world examples for you. And we're going to use a PowerPoint. So business turnarounds. What are they? It's the process of taking an existing operating business, a business that's in decline, and making it work properly again, making it profitable again, and setting it up for a bright future. In my view, it's not a financial restructure, although that could be part of it. Making the cash repayments work better and the interest payments and so forth, that's all part of running a business. But it won't fix the base disease, which is the business not functioning properly. And all sorts of things can be involved. Financial restructuring, as I've just said. Maybe it's you need to introduce new product onto the market. Maybe you need to push the marketing. You might need to change employees or to refocus them and just smooth out the way the business operates. Perhaps it's internal procedures. And if you've got capital, machinery and stock and so forth, make that all work harder. And of course it could be all of the above. Each company is different, depends upon the particular circumstances. So the focus of this presentation is not the financial restructure. It's about making the business work. Let's have a look. The first question to answer is, who's going to do it? Who's going to be responsible for the restructure or the turnaround? And the answer is that it could be anybody. But they have to be clear of the operational responsibilities. Can't be worried about getting orders and processing payments if you're trying to work on the business. It's a difference between working on the business and in the business. You need to be working out of the business on it. And you must be able to see the big picture, what's happening in the wider world. Maybe the product you're trying to sell isn't required anymore. Maybe you haven't quite tapped into the market. Maybe the market is still growing for what you sell. But you also need to have the authority to make the changes that need to be made. What I'm talking about can be done by an owner or a manager, but it generally doesn't work that well because, quite frankly, they should have already done the things. If the business is in trouble, they should have already fixed it. And I'll make the point, this is not a business advisor's role. I'm talking about rolling up the sleeves and getting into the business and fixing it, not sitting back giving advice on how it could be improved. So it's usual to use an outsider. And that person generally has no personal or historic ties to the business. They'll probably bring additional skills in. And when the job is done, they'll leave. And they'll take any bad karma or ill feeling with them. If you're thinking that your business needs to be turned around, and you're the business owner, you need to think about some things. Do you actually want the business to continue? The answer to that might be no. You've had enough, you're approaching retirement, you're just too damn tired, you want to sell it, whatever. Can you fix it yourself without having a breakdown? And I'm talking about you breaking down, not the equipment. Can you pay for help? And can you step back and let the consultant do the job? These are issues, they're big picture issues, and it typically means that you've got to put your big boy pants on. You've got to decide whether you can do this job or not. And if the answer is no, get somebody in to do it. Everybody has their way of approaching it. This is mine. I use a medical analogy. I say there's 3 stages. The triage, to find and stop the bleeding. The operation, where you're changing things and repairing things and putting them back together the way they should be. And the rehabilitation, which is just smoothing the way it all operates and getting everything functioning properly again. I use the medical analogy because you're basically trying to keep the company alive. And even at the triage stage, you may need to make hard decisions about letting part of the business die. And triage, well, sometimes it's actually not about stopping the bleeding. Sometimes it's about feeding the patient. Maybe they've been starved of love and direction and management for too long, and just giving them that little bit of care and consideration can perk up the whole enterprise. In my experience, each of these 3 stages is a month. It's a 3-month overall program. If you can't get it done in 3 months, well, you've got some other problems. And now the secret sauce. How I do it. On day 1, I establish myself as the boss. Doesn't mean I'm arrogant. I just say, hey, I'm here, I'm in charge. Come to me with your issues, and I have some initial rules. Not a cent goes out of this business without my specific approval. No quotes go out without my specific approval. And no goods go out without my specific approval. They're harsh rules, and they probably only last for a week. But in that week, you get a very quick understanding of what the hell is going on in the company. Where the bleeding is, where the problems are, whether you're selling things too cheap and so forth. Right at the start, I get everybody together. I tell them who I am, what I'm there to do, and how long I'm going to be there. I found it important to put a time frame on it. If it's a 3-month time frame, then people can say, well, I can put up with any fool for 3 months and then he'll be gone. And that's cool. That suits my purposes. The no payments and quotes, well, it lets me see how they've been purchasing. And I can check the invoice against the goods received to see whether that makes sense, see whether there's any related party transactions going on that maybe shouldn't. Checking quotes, well, that'll show me, are the costs real? Are the margins appropriate? And God help us if there's commissions involved, we can look at that too. The whole exercise is about looking for trends. Maybe not details on day 1, but you want to know where the likely areas are that are causing problems. This will fairly quickly let you get the cash flow under your thumb. You're controlling the money coming in and the money going out. And that's very important. Businesses are not charities. They have to make a profit. And if you don't control the cash flow, you'll never get to that stage. And the last point here is the department heads. I want your data. I want to know what projects you're on. I want the accounts. I want to know what the QA records are saying. I want the organisational charts. I want the resumes of current people. I want to know the aged payables and aged receivables and so forth. It's about collecting the data on which you can make further decisions. So that was day 1. You kick off all of those things. For the rest of the week, I talk about it as being management by walking. Get walking. Go visit everybody, every little corner of the business, in particular the furthest back corner or the furthest away office, the furthest corner of the store, that's where all the secrets will be hidden, and you're after the secrets. Meeting with department heads will start to head you in that direction. And you'll also start to see the implications of the financial management on the business and vice versa. I've seen it important to actually identify the purpose of the business. You know, the purpose of the business is not normally what people think it is. It should be to make a profit, but we'll get to more of that later. Identifying the purpose, understanding where the cash is going, allows you to start formulating a plan. And along about this time, it's quite possible that you realize your client is the cause of the problem. That's generally a bit of a disappointment, and it's something that needs to be handled very carefully. You really want to give the client positive news, not tell him he's an idiot. And the last one on the list, get the place cleaned up. Generally, declining companies are a mess. I've seen some filthy ones. Get the place cleaned up. It's a visible difference that there's a new sheriff in town and things are changing. People just walking through the offices or the factory will see changes, and that's important for their psyche. It's not about being their friend, but it is about improving their attitudes and maybe even creating a little excitement. Now, at the end of the first week, you're going to have a lot of financial stuff. The accountant will bury you in it and try and baffle you with BS. There's some key things to check for. Number one is unpaid superannuation or insurances. They are the number one thing that people don't pay when the business is going bad. You get in a lot of trouble this way. It will tell you just how deep the doo-doo is that the business is in if they haven't paid super or insurance premiums. The next one here, taking up profit early, that's done. I understand it's a legal thing to do, but it's done to make the books look good. So the profit I hope to make from a long-term project in November, I'm going to put in the books in March. And it makes my March figures look fantastic. Yeah, but you can only do that for a certain period. And all of a sudden, you fall in a big hole because you've taken up all the profit from future jobs, and this month you've got nothing. It's an indicator that the business is run for appearances, not in reality. Excess assets. I've seen all sorts of things, from stupid amounts in the store to the girlfriend of the managing director having a company car. You need to be sure and understand that all the assets you've got are going to be sold at a profit, and if they're capital machinery, for example, they're going to make that profit for you. Have a damn good look at your inventory. And that's the next topic, stock valuations and old stock. Lots of companies have crazy amounts of old stock in their warehouse that cost them a bomb at the time. And they won't get rid of it. And they won't depreciate it, because that, they think, is the value of the company. A warehouse full of worthless, old, no value stock marked up to make it look like it's really worth something gets you nowhere. You're fooling yourself, and anybody you want to sell the company to is going to see right through it. Don't do it. But that's another item to look for. And then there's expenses that have been capitalized. So we worked on a project. Okay, well, that would normally be an expense, hours and materials and so forth. Oh no, we're going to call that capital, and we're going to put it aside and depreciate it and all the rest of it and add to the assets of the company. Again, you're cooking the books, and the only people you're fooling are yourselves or the stupid around you. Another point on excessive stock, that sort of maybe worked 40 years ago, But now you've got the situation where anyone can Google just about anything, buy it on Amazon, find it on a blog site somewhere, and buy it for half the price of what you got it in the store. Again, things change. Keeping massive amounts of old stock doesn't help. So by now you've also worked out the major components of the cash flow. Not only the flow in, but the flow out. You know what bits to look for. And you're probably looking at the financial reports saying, this is a pile of poo. It just doesn't make sense, and we've got to get it into plain English. I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not an accountant. I want to look at the figures and understand them. Understand them without somebody else explaining them to me and telling them how they've massaged the numbers. Your reports need to be clear, accurate, make sense, are in plain English. One item that gets my goat very much is negative liabilities. Classic example is an insurance premium. It's not an expense, it's a negative liability. That's bullshit. So you start seeing that sort of stuff in your financial reports, you start thinking about the new accountant you're going to hire. So that was week 1. Now let's talk about the rest of the month. Get engaged with staff. Keep that management by walking going. Talk to anybody about anything. You might require some bridge building and diplomacy. You'll probably have to listen to some rants, but there's a fair chance you'll meet people that say, thank God you're here. We've needed help for years. Here's all the problems and here's how to fix them. If there are gross issues, what I've called open wounds here, fix them immediately. Just, if you've got to amputate a limb, do it. Get the business sorted. Do not let infections fester. You're there to fix it. You're the man. You can't fob it off onto anybody else. If there's a QA system in place, start using it. If it's run properly, it'll tell you where the major problems are. Could be in rework, for example. It could be in poor product quality. It could be in not meeting the customer's needs, or maybe the customer just hates the way they're treated. Number 3 is make sure everybody understands what their job really is and they're doing it. Lots of examples where people think they're doing the right thing, but they're not. That no one, their manager or lack of manager, has failed to say, hey, if you did this way, it would be better, or you need to also do this, or forget about that. We don't do things that way anymore. Lots and lots of examples that I've been through. And again, make sure all the assets are working. And at the end of the month, you've got the plan and you're ready to implement it. So month 2, get out there and action the plan and ruthlessly enforce its implementation. No maybes, no delays, no worried about people's feelings. Just do it. You're there to fix the business. You're not there to make friends or to be loved. You're there maybe to earn respect, but mostly to fix the business. You make all the changes that you need to. And it might be a traumatic month. Everybody's having their departments torn apart and restructured. I get it. But it's like ripping the Band-Aid off. Do it in 1 month and you don't need to worry about it into the future. And that way you get it all transitioning to a better place and a better future. And now the easy part. Month 3. You've done the triage. You've upset everybody. You've changed everything. You've put it back together. And hey, it's working almost right. So you can sit back and monitor it all. Tweak it a little bit where necessary. And in particular, monitor the financial improvements. And the most important thing you can do is get ready to hand it over. A couple of times I've actually employed my replacement. But I could be handing this back to the previous underperforming management. I could be handing it back to the owner. Manage that handover. Have the training ready for them. And yes, I do say training. It might not be a course with an exam at the end of it, but they need to be fully educated as to what's working and what shouldn't be changed, and what should continue to be improved upon. The outcomes of all of this are going to be better financial returns, a stable management which pleases everybody, continued employment for staff. Sometimes they don't want to be there, but it's better that you've got the staff than you haven't. And a future for the business. All good things. So let's look at some real world examples. This was a tier 1 automotive press plant. It was $1 million in the red. It had $1 million worth of invoice sent but not pursued or paid. $1 million worth of invoices not sent because the internal paperwork hadn't been done. And $1 million worth of orders not actioned. In 3 months, we turned all of that round and had $1 million surplus. Now, a couple of the issues there. In accounting, the invoicing lady, what's that, accounts receivable, issued the invoices. And that was all she did. She wouldn't ring up and say, hey, you haven't paid. She wouldn't tell the boss they hadn't paid. She wouldn't complete the invoices if she hadn't got the paperwork in from the factory. And she wouldn't go out and get the paperwork, because that would mean leaving a nice little warm cubbyhole. It took her 2 months to realise that this crazy turnaround dude was going to come and annoy her every day for how many invoices were out, how many were paid, what were the actions being taken to get the money. She eventually tweaked to it and was ready for me every morning. And she got very proactive and very proud of what she was doing, and is a big part of why there's $1 million surplus at the end of 3 months. My example from the factory about assets and management by walking. I used to walk around. The whole site was 28 hectares. It was a fair bit of walking. And I noticed forklifts buzzing everywhere, usually empty, and I couldn't work it out. And I listened to the line foreman complaining there were never any forklifts. They could never find a forklift when they needed one. And I tweaked to what was happening. The guys on the forklifts didn't want to get off the forklift because it was a nice cushy job driving around all day. If they got off the forklift, 2 things might happen. They'd actually have to work, and 2, somebody else would get the forklift and they'd miss out. So what we did was take about half the forklift fleet out of action, which was good because their batteries were dying. We used 2-way radios that the company already owned, and we gave them to the line foreman and the forklift operators. And whenever a forklift was required, the foreman would be on the radio and whistle one up. We made the assets and the people work hard and smart. It was a win for everybody, except maybe the guys that didn't get to sit on a forklift all day. At the end of this, it's a bit sort of counterintuitive. The business was so profitable, it got sold. And I guess that's a good outcome. Number 2 was a transport company delivering liquor to supermarkets in Sydney. They had a big problem with overtime because the drivers ran into afternoon peak. The reason they ran into afternoon peak was they'd run into morning peak. The reason they'd run into morning peak was security at the warehouse didn't open the gates when they were supposed to at 4 a.m. They tried everything. Didn't know how to fix this problem. They were reduced to shaking the gate and yelling out as loud as they could in the 4 a.m. darkness. I took a different tack and went to see the warehouse manager. He wasn't available, and I was asked if I could leave a message. I said, sure. Tell him I'd like his home number so I can give it to all our truck drivers, and they can ring him at 4 a.m. in the morning when security hasn't opened the gates. I never heard from that gentleman. The business never heard from him. I never got to meet him. But from the next morning on, the security gates were opened at 4 o'clock when they should have been. Sometimes you don't have to make big changes to make a big impact. So after one day's work, that business was operating profitably. It was actually the shortest turnaround I've ever done. Next real world example is an earth moving equipment OEM. It was in danger of closure due to lack of orders. And I was engaged by the silent partner to protect his $2 million investment in the business. I took over from the MD. He still worked in the business, but I took charge. They had lots of quotes out that had not been lost, but hadn't been turned into orders either. And they had lots of unanswered inquiries. So we got a big whiteboard, huge whiteboard, and we put them all up. And we identified the top 10. Said, right, those 10 we're going to work on. We're going to chase those clients. And out of those top 10, we picked the top 3. The ones are sort of some mix of the highest value and the most likelihood of getting them, and getting them quickly. And I told the sales manager, go and see all 3 of those customers, pour a bottle of red down them, take them to a nice lunch, get the damn order. And he did that. And strangely, he didn't have to spend much in wine. But we did a 6-fold increase in 6 weeks in the order. And the business succeeded. And I got fired. I got fired because the silent partner was actually distantly related to the managing director, who I had inadvertently shown up as a crappy manager. That caused so much ructions in the family that it was easier to terminate me and get the family settled back down. But that business ran for at least another 20 years, and the has only recently closed because of the retirement of the managing director. IT is a brutal industry. Trust no one, particularly big software companies. This business was in danger of closure because of lack of sales, and there were very high staffing. Because it was a technical business, we needed the technical experts. We didn't have the turnover still to continue the business or to pay for all of that staff. I was engaged by the owner to protect his investment, and I operated as a sales and marketing manager. One of my first ports of call was the financial controller to ask, what's your opinion? He wanted to fire all the salesmen because they were the major cost. He had no answer for how do we sell anything without salesmen. In questioning him further, I asked him about his experience and his reputation, and he proudly told me his reputation was that he gave the best head in Sydney. That was not the answer I was looking for, but it set the tone for our future work relationship. I didn't see him too much as a financial controller and had to go elsewhere to work out what was going on in the business. The main problem was the very experienced sales team only worked as hard as they could. It was strange that all the orders came in the last week of the month because they had to fill their quota. So I was reduced to standing at people's doorways, watching them work. I also had to stop a lot of infighting by email. People that worked in the one corridor would send nasty emails to each other over problems instead of getting off their butts, management by walking a few doors down and having a discussion. One of the biggest problems there were commissions. The salesman set the margins, the commission came out of the margin, and it was paid at the time the order was received. Normally, the salesman vastly underestimated the cost and therefore the margin, and overestimated the margin, and was paid on an overestimated margin, paid a commission on an overestimated margin. It was a big problem for the business, but we didn't have time to fix that on that occasion. It did work well. We increased the sales 60% in 3 months, and then unfortunately the business folded over a Christmas period, because a lot of orders for work to be done over Christmas were cancelled, and the responsible manager didn't tell anybody in management. Everybody came back from Christmas break to find out the company was bust because no work had been invoiced over that period. And one last example, an intellectual property company working in R&D of filtration. Massive amounts of intellectual property, all of it impressive, but nothing saleable. Investor funds were disappearing without any return, and I was engaged by the primary investor to try and turn this to commercialise the business. The business was focused on R&D and how wonderful the IP was, but they were quite naive regarding what it takes to run a business and make a profit. Very early on, I sat the managers down in a boardroom and asked the inventor dude, what's the purpose of the business? Oh, to demonstrate the wonderful intellectual property and how well these ideas and patents can be applied. Fine. I asked the investor what was the purpose of the business. And he said about, telling the global market how good this product is. And the father of the inventor was there, an elderly gent. I asked him what the purpose of the business was, and he said, that's bullshit. The purpose of the business is to make money. And everybody went, oh, yeah, of course. It's very easy to forget what the purpose of the business is. If you're not making money, you're a charity and you're going to go broke. So important right at the start to identify what the purpose of the business is. And obviously that's a logical thing, but it also helps your decision making in managing the business. Because if the purpose is purpose A, then every decision you make, from financing to development to buying company car, you can say, how is that going to help achieve the purpose? Is it going to help? Well, it's not really. Well, we don't do it. If it is going to help, well, we better do it fast. So the end result, we proved the IP, we built prototypes, we had them out on demonstration, saleable products were designed and produced. So a good result. But of course, all that's mainly the good side. There are risks. The business can fail for other reasons, like the IT business that failed over Christmas. Wasn't anything to do with getting a 60% increase in sales. It's just that they weren't implemented. The business can always be too far gone to be saved, and you're better off having an auction. Fixing it, particularly if you're trying to address stupid valuations on old stock, can make it look less attractive to banks or buyers. So if you devalue your assets by putting realistic price on all the old stock you've got, all of a sudden the bank will say, well, we've lent you X, but you're only worth Y. No. And the same thing with buyers. They might think you're worth this much, but the reality is down here, you're not as attractive to buy. For a consultant, the major risk is, of course, I don't get paid. So it's a big ask to look at a failing business and then go in to fix it. And that's why you get paid, because you're taking a risk that they won't be able to pay you. So in conclusion, most faulty businesses can be saved if action is taken early enough. No action will definitely lead to disaster. It's tricky. Even as an outsider, I want the business to be savable. And I want the owner to recognise that it's savable. But they've also got to be willing to make the changes, and often they aren't. I've seen a major aluminium company here go kaput because of a crappy accountant, and the elderly owner knew he was crappy, knew he was ruining the business, but to him, the accountant was the devil he knew, and he wasn't going to make any changes. And the very well-known, widespread company is no longer. The approach you take has to be a holistic one. You can't just look at this little bit. You have to look not only throughout the company, but throughout the world, and see what are the outside impacts that are affecting the business, and how do you accommodate that. The client has to have the courage and the willingness to step back, hand his baby over to someone else, and trust that it'll come back all grown up and doing better. It can be a very rewarding result for them. And in all of the examples, it has been. In all of my business turnarounds, it has been. Sometimes businesses have suffered after the turnaround through outside factors, but generally it's been successful. If you've got a failing business, I really suggest you have a damn good look at it, decide whether you want it to continue, whether you can do it yourself, whether you can turn it around, and if not, get some help. Get some help, get some experts, and then step back and let them do what they need to do. It can be a very rewarding result. Thank you.